We're rolling. Hopefully we don't have any of the interruptions of the last one. That was incredible. Eloy Zarate, storyteller.
Xenia Lupicic, historian.
In the last lecture, I alluded to that there are going to be a lot of changes that are going to be occurring because of the expansion of the economic world system, or the economic world system that is emerging. And this lecture is going to begin that push into a transformation of how human beings will organize themselves. And usually when we have gigantic changes, systemic changes, we call them revolutions.
It's such a fun word. And the dog's gonna jump in today.
It's okay.
It's great. I really, really thought you were gonna jump in a very different way. That was such a connected, continuing, easy to edit introduction. I thought it was like, hold on to my seat. We're talking about revolutions. You've got a slide saying model revolutions. And of course that's French. But you're right, revolutions is the word we apply to a lot of things in history. And this is not just a storyteller thing, it's a historian thing. The Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, the Bronze Age revolution. I mean, we're just always throwing revolution into the way that we talk about things because it's a simple way to communicate change, and change on a significant scale.
And so revolutionary is this period that you're going to have 3 entire lectures on transformations of how worldviews are going to be transformed because of this period, which we usually allude to as, or discuss as, the Enlightenment as a revolution of thought.
And that's going to be part of what we are looking at as we talk about these model revolutions. Sometimes you'll have courses where the Enlightenment is introduced ahead. And really in this course, the way that it's built, we are introducing it simultaneously with a lot of the economic changes and the political changes, because sometimes we make it a little too sequential. And I avoided a Xenia word there. I was going to say teleological, but sometimes we make it a little too sequential. There's the idea, there's the action, and in reality, there's a constant shifting of ideas and actions and reactions. And that's part of the challenge of talking about this time period. We've titled this the model revolutions, because in the late 1700s into the 1800s, you have a series of political revolutions that are connected to the economic changes and the social changes and the intellectual changes that will provide a sort of template or blueprint for how these revolutions are going to be conducted. People will look back to them and reference them as the way to carry out a successful revolution. So just to be very clear, the flags that you see on our title slide are the Haitian flag, the American flag, and the French flag, or the flag of the United States is probably a more accurate way to say that.
Very good save.
Caught myself.
Good save.
So the Haitian flag, the United States flag, and the French flag. These are 3 revolutions that will happen very close chronologically to each other. They will have differences, and they will have their favorite stories. And this is a part where my storyteller comes out, because the French Revolution is the area that I specialized in, and I love to talk about it.
And my real storyteller part, and the one I was trained in, is going to get its own lecture after this one.
Entirely all to itself. That was not my doing, obviously, because if you took the first half of World, you'll see that I really try to jump over anything that he actually studied. But that being said, we tend to reference these. As a French historian, I like to think of the French Revolution as being the true model. Part of what we really want you to be thinking about as you look at the material this week is why we don't give the Haitian Revolution that status. The Haitian Revolution, in the scope of these 3, really is the one most deserving of the term revolution, and really is the one that should be looked at as a reference and model.
And I think because we're going to try to emphasize the Haitian Revolution, it is the revolution that is going to try to combine what the French did and what the United States tried to do, or never confronted. The U.S. Revolution will never confront what the Haitian Revolution and the Latin American revolutions will confront head on. And the reason why those revolutions and those struggles will not end for decades. Just to give you a little hint of what's coming, what the Haitian Revolution is going to do is ask the question, what do you do with the formerly enslaved people? That is something that in the United States Revolution or independence movement, there will be solutions, carving them in half, carving them in 3/5, but they will not get citizenship. The struggles that will happen in Latin America, and just to have you think about this, how successful would the United States independence movement have been if they had to include African Americans and Native Americans into their political representation?
The point that you just made is really what I was thinking, that if you were to take the French Revolution and the American Revolution and sort of add them together, you might get towards what the Haitian Revolution actually has to contend with. That when we talk about these series of lectures on the revolution, one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is the colonial legacies. And the colonial legacies are not going to be the same throughout the Americas. So using the term more correctly, North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, there's going to be terrific variety in terms of what the different populations have to confront. And in the American Revolution, I loved that you said independence movement, because for the French, from their perspective, the American Revolution wasn't a revolution of the people. It was a first war of decolonization, and they assisted in that effort, helping beat back the colonial power of England. The Haitians are not going to get that kind of assistance as they try to beat back the many colonizers who have been encroaching on their territory. They are going to have to fight their way through in terms of identifying how do you create a free state, a democratic government that actually represents the diversity of the population that's there. Your smile always makes me nervous, so go for it.
When you have the ideas of freedom and liberty, the people with privilege who want that and are privileged have one perspective. But what happens if those people who are dominated by your system get an idea of freedom and liberty? What will a person who's enslaved, when you tell them about freedom and liberty, they have one very focused goal on what they need to do. Or if you're a Native American who was free, and now you are given the idea that we're fighting for freedom, they're going to have very different views than a white privileged landowner or just a white person in that struggle.
And those struggles are something that you're going to see in each of the different revolutions. You will have a way that is dealt with in the revolution in the United States. The French are going to have their terror, where they just start exterminating people who oppose the idea of the revolution. And you're going to have struggles that are going to characterize the formations of states as they try to figure out how do you include people. But I think a really important aspect of all of this to keep in mind is that these ideas are not revolutionary in and of themselves, that the people who are, whether they've been enslaved or they've been dispossessed, they know that this has happened to them. They know that this is not right. There's a wonderful example that we use in our U.S. history class of a petition brought by enslaved people saying, we know that there are rights. We know that there are things that you observe and that you uphold, and we are asking that you give them to us. You have all sorts of examples throughout the Western Hemisphere of populations who are enslaved or oppressed, making the argument, using the language that people who have privilege are using to defend their rights, what they are taking as their entitlements. And so sort of running through these model revolutions really is a sort of false confrontation of privilege, that they are going to try to tear it down, but not entirely. They're always going to try to keep something for themselves.
And I think just what came to mind right now, when you brought up the idea of that people know, I think when we read our Constitution and it says rights endowed by the Creator or rights that are natural, when I think about that, I don't think of it as something that is supernatural. I think human beings deep down inside have an idea of what it is to be free or to be in control of their own lives. It's just that up to this point, there hasn't been a structural confrontation to eliminate the old and traditional restraints of political and economic structures. But now during this time, this power of that is going to be now discussed in these terms that are now political terms, right? You're going to fight for freedom. You're going to fight for liberty. No one's had that opportunity up to this point. And the most radical of these visions will come in the Americas, as they are decolonization movements at the same time. You have these discussions in Europe about being free and having liberty. But it's harder when the institutions, the traditional institutions of monarchy, are right there. How are you going to restructure these ideas? But in the Americas, you're far away, it's complex, and the power of these ideas are going to come to fruition.
And so we framed all of this by talking about the three visions of society. And in a lot of what Eloy was just saying, that is part of the tension. That you have had a very strict structure of monarchy in the traditional vision of society. It has provided an order that does oftentimes carry with it some sort of supernatural, divine right, absolute authority underpinning. With the liberal vision of society, what we're moving into during this period of the course, now humans are going to have to define what those parameters are and how those systems are going to function. And a lot of the time is to try to elevate the privilege of one group while still keeping others at a distance and not allowing them all the way in. So we'll talk about in another video about these three visions, yes, about the buffers that are being created as they do this, the way that they are distancing themselves, that you are going to have all of this economic change that's driving the way that people are going to be imagining their place in the world. But at the same time, that economic success, that economic opportunity is coming because you are dispossessing and you are enslaving, you are oppressing. And they are going to try to find a way to justify how they do both. And that is going to be terrifically problematic. And it's why we wanted to spend a little bit of time giving particular focus to Haiti. Because in the scope of revolutions, this is one that is largely erased. And if you are paying attention to the news at all, the Haitian government is seemingly in a constant state of either trauma or disarray. The upheaval, the uncertainty is terrifically top of the news. And we don't often celebrate it as one of the longest and most successful democracies in the Western Hemisphere. It's not what comes to mind. And that's a large part because of the way that historians and storytellers deal with the Haitian Revolution. It was not convenient to have an emerging revolutionizing democracy in the Caribbean when the rest of the surrounding territories are places where you have enslaved populations producing for this economic system. This is not an effective government to support if you're trying to keep a large portion of your own population enslaved, to not give those ideas of freedom, of equality.
So you have the Haitian Revolution beginning with kind of a traditional liberal vision of how they want to separate themselves, how Haiti wants to separate themselves from France. The elite want to create a liberal system that they're in control of in the tradition of what the French Revolution has done up till the 1800s. But then 85% of your population are enslaved. And when they start understanding we're fighting for our freedom, we're fighting for liberty, those traditional elite are no longer able to control that economic and social force that sees freedom as now their right, what you're going to see, and it happens in the French Revolution, it happens in every revolution, once you start having these visions begin to expand and more people get involved, you can't control the economic, social, and political force of people that now see their own individual opportunity. And that comes from small landed white farmers to enslaved populations that are now saying, I want to get rid of this system. So you have a radicalization as these ideas begin to spread and spread and spread and spread. So these revolutions are not one event, but what they all do is unleash a force that is no longer being able to be controlled by anyone. Yeah, it's powerful.
It is. It's very powerful. So as you study this week, what I'd actually like you to think about is to go back to something that Aloy said at the start of this lecture. When he talked about the United States Revolution not going as far as what the Haitians had to do for their revolution to be successful. In the United States, still today, we are grappling with the reality that we did not go as far as we needed to in the revolution. When I teach my traditional classes, I always say you have these long periods of time. We like to put dates and say that things ended, that the French Revolution went from 1789 to, if we want to be generous, 1815. But in reality, as a French historian, we would say it wasn't complete until 1870, when the Third Republic finally created a stable Republican government for France. And I would say the same thing about the United States. 1776 is when the revolution begins, but it hasn't gotten to a place where you can start talking about it, creating an inclusive democracy, until 1865. And you could even argue then that we haven't achieved it in the 1960s, and that we are rolling back at present this inclusive idea of what a democratic state is. So understanding the long term of what Aloy was saying, in the United States, we still leave monuments up for Confederate soldiers. In Haiti, when Napoleon tried to reclaim the territory for France, he erected a statue of Josephine. And when he was beat back by the Haitians because of this incredible power, they beheaded the statue. The guillotining, people who had been against the revolution were guillotined in France. There's a statue of Josephine beheaded, still standing in Haiti. And I think that's a powerful way for a population to say, this is what we are doing actively. This is what our democracy is. So as we work through this material, understanding the many forces that are at play, the force that is involved, and a lot of times the inherent contradictions that persist.
And I think I'd like to end this with, again, probably the most famous speech given by an American president is the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln, where he says, what are we fighting for? Fourscore, those years ago, they started something, and that this Civil War is going to finish it. We're fighting to continue this vision of equality and freedom for all. And that's what that war was about, from his point of view, ending or continuing the legacy that was done by the founders. And I think you see that what these ideas and what these revolutions are going to unleash never end. And we're still struggling with those issues daily in all these countries. How do you give freedom and equality under the law to all your citizens or to all people?
Yeah, a history that's present.